You're welcome.
Can you see and hear me? Because I can't see or hear anybody.
Yeah, I can. I can see and hear you. Can you see and hear me?
Okay, good. Yeah, I'm having some internet problems. That's why I was late.
I've been having a lot of problems with Teams. But I was actually early for the call today. It's a miracle.
It's really slow, but it's weird. But my all the other devices I have, it's absolutely fine.
Yeah, you're a bit breezy. Are you still there, Hayley?
Any issues? Oh, I don't know why you can't hear me.
Yeah, you might need to turn off your camera and just see how it goes then.
Yeah, it's not ideal to run the meeting with
No, but it sometimes settles down, I find.
Do you want to quickly try? Yeah, do you want to quickly try leaving the meeting and joining again because you're frozen? I don't know if that will help potentially.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I can try that. Yeah. Before this meeting, I turned the laptop on and off again, and I'll restart the internet as well. But okay, I'll leave the meeting and come back.
Where are you, Harvey?
I have a quick question while we're waiting. When I'm looking at participants, at the bottom, it's got people added to the chat. So are they not invited to the meeting? How does that work? What does that do? Anybody?
Well, they look. Obviously, Cabinet get an invite if they want to watch, so it's something to do with that. But they're not. They're people who haven't actually joined the meeting, so it could be something to do with that. I haven't personally added them to the chat, so it must just be something that Teams does. Hi, Hayley. You're mute. Sorry.
Yeah. Is this better?
That seems better. Hayley, so just let Susie know when you're ready to start. And then we'll go.
Yeah. Okay. I've got the paper in front of me. Cool. Yeah. We'll go, and then Eric, you have to have the agenda and be ready to step in if it carries on. Cool. Okay. Yeah. I'm ready to start.
Yep. Okay. And we are go.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Climate Emergency Advisory Committee here at Vale of Whitehorse District Council. I'm your chair, Councillor Hayley Gascoigne, and we have quite a few items on the agenda today. So if we start first with Chair's announcements, which includes some announcements and also general housekeeping matters. So the first thing I just want to say is that For the Climate Emergency Advisory Committee, we hold this meeting online to be more eco-friendly, and also we're not required to hold it in person, so that's why I've made the choice to hold it online. So if all of the councillors could please have their cameras on, and then anyone who is tuning into this meeting via YouTube, or if they choose to watch it back, they can see all of the committee members' faces. And then if any of the officers, obviously they can turn on their cameras when they are speaking. And during the meeting, if you wish to speak, then please raise your hand, and I will call upon you to speak or ask your questions or whatever it may be. And that was all I was going to say for general housekeeping matters. So in terms of announcements, I would like to, first, where it comes to the committee, I would like to thank some outgoing members. So since our last meeting, we have changed a few of the members. So we'd like to thank Councillor Sally Powolowski and Councillor James Cox, who are both previous members of this committee, and actually Councillor Powolowski in particular used to be a portfolio holder for climate, and so we will miss her knowledge on the committee, though I'm sure she is available to us should we want to speak to her about any particular matter. So thank you to both of those councillors, and I would like to welcome councillors Kira Bentley and Max Thompson. Thank you so much for joining this committee, and we're really delighted to have you here discussing matters of climate and making our recommendations to Cabinet, which is what our role is here. And then finally, I would like to introduce, we have a new person who's joined us in our officer team for climate, and that is Roselle Chapman. She recently joined as Nature Recovery Officer, and she'll initially be focusing on undertaking an audit of the Vale's land, to the land that we own, that is, to help us better understand what we have and how we can look for more opportunities to help with nature recovery. And as we all know, this is an important part of our role as council, is making improvements to biodiversity and how we manage our own land. So welcome, Roselle. I'm really glad to have you working with us at Vale of Whitehorse District Council. Okay, that brings us on to the second item on the agenda, which is apologies for absence. Candida, do we have any apologies?
No, all members of the committee are here.
Brilliant, thank you. Item 3 on the agenda is minutes of the last meeting. So are there any members here who have any comments on the minutes, any issues, or may I sign these as a correct record of the last meeting? No, I can't see anybody raising any issues, so I would suggest that we are okay. Candida, do we need a proposer and a seconder, or can I just sign those?
Yes, if you could do that, that would be helpful, I think.
With the proposer and seconder,
yes.
Okay.
I mean, the minutes were
Okay,
from some time ago, weren't there? So it might just, from the people who were present, maybe to just accept them.
I'm happy to propose.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Streams.
I'm happy to second.
Oh, I think we've got Clegg, Councillor Clegg in first. Thank you. Is that okay, Candida?
Yeah, thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so item 4 on the agenda is declaration of interest. So it's for us to receive any declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests, other registerable interests, and non-registerable interests, or any conflicts of interest in respect of the items on the agenda for this meeting. Is there anybody, any of the councillors, any of the members of this committee that wish to raise any declarations of interest? I don't see any. Okay, so in that case, we'll move on to the 5th item, which is urgent business. There is no urgent business this evening, so we can move on to item 6, public participation. To receive any questions or statements from members of the public that have registered to speak. I believe there hasn't been any. Is that correct, Candida?
That's correct, Chair. Yeah.
Thank you. Great. Okay, we can move on to the more substantial items on the agenda today. So firstly, item 7, we have an update from the Cabinet Member for Climate Action, Nature Recovery and Strategic Partnerships, which happens to be our leader, Councillor Bethia Thomas. So she'll give her update just now, and then if we have any comments or questions afterwards, I'll take those. Is that okay, Bethia?
Thank you, Hayley. Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm very happy to attend this meeting, and I think it's really only my second CEEAC meeting with the way of things have fallen dates-wise. But I'm happy to update everyone with the highlights since then, and there's been a lot of work and many thanks to officers. The team has been developing the new Climate and Nature Recovery Action Plan over this time, and we will get an update from Chloe later about progress on this. We are expecting positive news soon about our funding bid to Innovate UK to allow the trial of a new electric refuse vehicle, which has been successful. The trial is designed to help us to understand the practicalities of running electric waste collection vehicles in our rural district, which, as we know, is one of the major stumbling blocks. So that's really good news. The councils have successfully bid for funding from Innovate UK for a project to develop new markets in Oxfordshire for nature-based carbon offsetting. The project will be led by the Local Nature Partnership with Vale of Whitehorse, South Oxfordshire, West Oxfordshire and Charwell District Councils as project partners. Again, very exciting. I went to something recently about this, and it was very, very interesting and inspiring for the future. Oxfordshire's bid for local electric vehicle infrastructure, otherwise known as LEVI, that funding was approved with 3.6 million allocated to the county. The LEVI funding will focus on expanding the accessibility of 7 kilowatt chargers that residents without home chargers can use overnight at discounted rates. Most of the new EV chargers will be installed in off-street parking locations such as council car parks, building on the success of the Park and Charge projects that we've seen so far. The latest round of the Climate Action Fund opened on the 3rd of May and closed on the 28th of June, with £100,000 available for eligible projects. We have had an excellent response with 29 applications and a total ask of nearly £220,000. The team are currently assessing the applications with a view to announcing the successful applications in September. So I would like to thank officers for all their hard work getting all of this achieved, and I'm happy to take questions if you have any. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Do we have any questions from our members? Give it a few moments. I have a question whilst we're waiting for those. So on the Climate Action Fund, recognising that it is oversubscribed, could you talk a little bit about what the process will be for deciding which applications get funding and what that kind of funding will be?
Thanks, Councillor Gascoigne. Yes, I believe this is probably the most oversubscribed we've ever been in the history of the Climate Action Fund. So that's good news, obviously, because it shows that people are really responsive to this. And we've had, obviously, a very clear method of adjudicating these applications. This may have changed since previously, and I can see Dom has leapt in, so I think he probably has something to add here. So I'll hand over to Dominic. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so essentially each application is assessed on its individual merits, and then they're all scored, and we will award those funding to the projects with the best score. So we don't have any preconceptions. Obviously, when we're going into the scoring process, it's all done completely on merit. So that's fundamentally the way it's done. And just a piece of updated news. We were able to carry forward some underspend from last year's Climate Action Fund into the current year as well. So we'll actually have a total of, I think it's around about 145,000 to give away this year. So hopefully the number of unsuccessful applicants will be slightly lower than we'd originally anticipated, which is great news for all the projects.
Thank you, Dom. Does that answer your question? Hey, sorry,
Yes, it does.
Myself.
No, that's good. It's good to have the support of the officers. Thank you. Okay, we do have a couple of other questions here. So if I go first to Councillor Scott Horton.
Yeah, thanks. Bethia, you mentioned the Levi funding for getting electric chargers installed, and I think I've heard that part of that's going to be grants towards helping parishes and village halls and such like installing chargers. Do you know if there's going to be any details on that, or are we waiting on county to announce how those grants are going to work?
Again, I think I'll definitely have to hand over to Dom on this one as well.
Yeah, I think Councillor Help, yes, it is. We are waiting for details from county. So yes, a proportion of that funding will go to sort of parish halls and things that have car parks as well. But yeah, we don't have any details on that at this point.
Okay,
Thank you. Councillor Robert Clegg.
Thank you. I'm just.
I can't hear Councillor Clegg. I don't know if anybody else can.
I'll try again. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, my internet connection's not brilliant.
Robert, if you did put your question in the chat, we could maybe read it out potentially.
Yeah, okay. We'll wait for him to do that, and in the meantime, we'll take Councillor Kira Bentley's question.
Thank you. I know in the sort of brief that your chat covers partnerships, Bethia, Councillor Thomas. I just wondered if you're going to talk about any of the partnerships, for instance, the National Landscape, which I do go to the meeting on. I wasn't sure whether we need to feed that back into this committee or direct to Cabinet, or where that sits and those kind of partnership relationships.
Yeah, thank you. Partnerships is part of my portfolio. It's separate from the climate and environment nature recovery section. It's a separate subset. I did actually meet with the National Landscapes team recently with David Ruane, Councillor David Ruane from South Oxfordshire District Council, and we had a very productive meeting. I think we need to work together to sort of forge how we communicate best with them, and I think they were very keen to do that. But yeah, that's not really relevant to this meeting. It's another subset of my portfolios.
I just think this meets some of the stuff that they cover is relevant, and I'm not sure whether this meeting would hear about it unless you talk about it, if you know what I mean, or is that, I'm not sure where that feeds in.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know whether Dominic would have any response to that, because I know you speak with him quite a lot, don't you, Dom?
Yeah, and I, as you'll know, Councillor Bentley, I support our members on the Council of Partners for the North West Six Downs as well, so I'm fully plugged into that process. But I think there are elements of what they do. So obviously they've produced a nature recovery plan for the North West Six Downs, which will be feeding into the Oxfordshire nature recovery plan. So there are crossovers, and I think where there are relevant topics and where, I mean, I think that we have to be careful that this meeting doesn't become a tell you about what's happening meeting. It needs to be a meeting where members are recommending courses of action to Cabinet rather than just discussing what's happened elsewhere. So I think if there is a topic comes up that we need to have a discussion about, and there may be some relevant recommendation to Cabinet, then obviously we can it'd be one that we can raise.
Great, thank you very much. That clears that up. Thanks, Councillor Thomas.
Thank you both. I can see that Councillor Clegg has written his questions in the chat, so I'll just read those out and hopefully we'll be able to hear them in future items. So it's a two-part question, Bethia, about EV for waste collection. So number one, is it a joint initiative with SODC? And number two, if EV range is an issue in our mostly rural region, has thought been given to prioritising the EV use in the towns and the large villages and leave the more rural areas to our more traditional waste collection vehicles?
Thank you. Thank you for that question, Councillor Clegg. This is something that's been ongoing for quite some time. Sorry, there's quite a lot of background noise. Apologise for that. And yes, we have been looking into it jointly, as far as I understand. The second part of your question, I think that has been considered. I would ask perhaps Dom could possibly add to that.
I think that the second question is something that will be a consideration once we've done the trial. So I think we need to establish whether or not the EV vehicles have the range, and obviously range with EVs is something that's increasing all the time. And so there's obviously our trial. There's also one going on in West Oxfordshire. So I think there are more and more rural districts very similar to us that are beginning to trial things. So I think it's a wait and see. So decisions will be based on the outcome of the trial to some extent.
Dominic, would you like me to come in?
Yeah, Heather, if you've got some additional information.
So obviously this is an operational matter for the waste team. It's not our area of expertise, but it has been asked this question in previous meetings. So my understanding is that with the current waste contractor, it isn't operationally possible. So the way they structure their rounds is every vehicle has to be able to do every round because they cycle in and out for maintenance. But it does seem that it could be considered in the future to see whether a different operational model could be possible. So that's the answer we've had so far. Thanks.
Thank you. I think, yeah, that's what I was trying to intimate. It has been an ongoing issue, and I've heard this discussion many times in different meetings. So it's something that has been explored and will continue to be explored, I think. So yeah, it's very positive news.
Thank you very much. And can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Different microphone.
Yeah, excellent. Great. I think we can close that agenda item just now. So thank you, Councillor Thomas, for your update and for taking our questions.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
No problem. So we can move on now to item 8 on the agenda, which is review of the operational net zero target. And we have Heather Saunders to take us through that item.
Thanks very much, Councillor Gascoigne, and good evening, everybody. So we're really pleased this evening to bring you this report on the progress towards our 2030 net zero operational target. In this report, we've set out our progress to date, and also for the first time, we've brought to you our projections of our possible position in 2030. So in the report, you will see there's 4 scenarios. These are not independent scenarios, they're scenarios of different projects, so each one builds on the previous one. And the scenarios are projects where we have already made a commitment, potential future projects to do with our building stock, decarbonising our council buildings. The third one is a potential solar farm on our own property to decarbonise the electricity to match our electricity use. And the final one is looking at achieving a low carbon fleet, which is largely the waste collection vehicles. So as you'll see, the report suggests that we do have potential to reach our 2030 target with a small amount of offsetting. But there is a caveat to this as set out in the report. Only the known projects, the committed projects in scenario 1 currently have allocated funding, and so reaching our target would require us to move very quickly to deliver the remaining projects, and we'd need to identify funding, which will probably be external funding, and also staffing resources. So it's an ambitious position to reach our 2030 target. Nevertheless, it's a stretch target, and if we had the right resource in place, it would be possible. So the report we bring you today is our first attempt at modelling these scenarios. We've been using a spreadsheet that we commissioned, and we have now, as a result of this first iteration, requested an updated version of the spreadsheet. So in the future, we hope to be able to increase the accuracy of these reports. It's also taken some time to get this report to CEEAC, and it's only using the data from 2022 to 23 financial year, and we'll soon be in a position to update this and include data from 2023 to 24 and give you a new viewpoint. Just apologies, we're very sorry, there's a minor formatting error in the report. If you might have noticed, the report does skip from paragraph 20 to paragraph 24, and the missing paragraph numbers 21, 22 and 23 have sneaked into table 2 under scenario 2 in the column headed carbon savings. So this column should just say that the basic figures 32, 26 and 44 without the numbers, with the paragraph numbers in front. So apologies for that. And the report includes suggested recommendations for CEEAC to take to Cabinet, and we welcome any questions on the report. Thanks.
Yeah, it would be nice, because I think.
Thank you very much, Heather. So just to remind committee members before we get into any discussion here, the role of this committee is to make recommendations. We're an advisory committee, so we make recommendations to Cabinet and then they make decisions. So bearing that in mind for this item this evening, I think Heather is happy to take any questions from us, any points of clarification, but what we should look to get by the end of our discussion is a recommendation to Cabinet on what we think they should do about our targets for the 2030 operational net zero. So yes, with that in mind, who would like to open with some questions or comments? Okay. Councillor Eric de la Harpe.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so I remember back in 2019 when we set the targets, and I was probably one of the main instigators of the interim target. And at the time, I thought we'd follow the 80-20 rule, where we'd managed to get down 80% of the emissions, and so a lot happening first, and then a very difficult period of coming down to zero. But actually the report, which is really good, indicates that there's like a lag with all the projects that are in process. So you get quite the opposite effect. You get a slow reduction and then a sudden drop towards the end. So I think the 75% target was perhaps naive in those days, but we also had COVID and all sorts of other things interfering with us. So I think about the target. I'm a little uncomfortable with dropping it. Maybe we could revise it to a 40% reduction, or we could shift it 5 years. So 75% in 5 years' time, and then 100% in 2035. So those are three suggestions I've got. So, well, it can be dropped, or it can be revised down, or it could be shifted.
Okay, so you've made some suggestions there. So perhaps if we, and there was not any particular question, so if we just take some more questions and comments, and we'll bear that in mind as we go through the discussion. So Councillor Max Thompson next.
Thanks very much, Councillor Gascoigne, and thanks very much, Heather Saunders, for the presentation. I guess I was just wondering a little bit about looking at figure 2 and the breakdown of emissions. And to be honest, I probably should have asked this beforehand, but I was just wondering, particularly when we're looking at things like staff and councillor mileage, I just wondered do you have any comments on how that's been declining or increasing over the past few years? Because I guess I just wondered, it's 4% of gas emissions in 2022-23. I just wondered if you had any comments about what's the trajectory there in terms of the percentage. Is it something that's decreasing quite rapidly post-COVID, or is it something that's being quite sticky and hard to get lower than 4%?
So obviously you can look on our greenhouse gas reports on the websites to see the trajectory up till now, and there would have been a massive drop in COVID, and then obviously it's gradually built up since then. I think we actually are still recruiting new staff, so there is a slight trend up, and the big challenge is at the moment that staff are not located in one place. So we did have plans in the Climate Action Plan, you probably remember, all those years ago, to look at pooled vehicles in a central location. And we were hoping to roll that out, and we very much had to take stock and revisit that because staff were all located in different places. So different options need to be looked at, and I think we'll be bringing that to you again for ideas in the new Climate Action Plan. I'm actually going to see if any of my, this is not a project I've been working on, so just in case any of my colleagues have any points to add here.
I don't have anything to add, but I think the point that Heather made about the baseline changing, we're in a very different place than we were. So if you look at a graph of staff mileage, because of, we're not working in the same way, you can't compare one with the other. It's a very different situation. But I suppose, just thinking logically in the longer term, if our staff profile follows a similar profile to others and more staff move to the use of electric vehicles, of their personal vehicles, which they then claim mileage on, and all councillors, it ought to take a gradual downward turn. But obviously that's not something we have direct control over ourselves, so it's a bit of a difficult one to factor in.
Actually, one more point. We have just started to look at staff who have very high mileage because of their role, and I think some teams are now beginning to look at if a member of staff has a really high mileage, it would actually be more cost effective for the council to lease them an electric vehicle rather than be paying them mileage. So this is very much, hot off the press new behaviour that we can start to look at, and I'm not sure how many plans there are for that, and hopefully we can come back to you with more information on that in the future.
That would be great. So just a point of clarification, the percentage here, is that staff, is this mileage and council mileage which is claimed back, or is it mileage just getting to work? Sorry, just these figures, is this figure just, sorry, you know what I'm trying to say, is this figure just mileage that staff and councils are claiming back, or is it mileage that is just being used getting to work generally?
Okay, so I need to just check back in the report, because it's possible that that 4% also includes the very small number of vehicles we own as well. Maybe we could improve our labelling. But on your question, we're currently not measuring commute. So it is miles claimed, but we are reviewing our data capture procedures. That will be another action in our new Nature and Climate Action Plan that is called Scope 3 emissions. And across the country, generally, organisations are reviewing what they capture. We want to be more accurate and influence in more areas. So this may well be something that we do start to capture in the future.
Great, thank you, Heather. And just before I move on to the next person who has a question, and you mentioned scope 1, 2, 3 emissions, and so I was just wondering, and I have to apologise in case this is really clear in the report, but the different scenarios that you've laid out, which scopes are those? Are those 1, 2, and 3, or just 1 and 2? And our target is 1, 2, and 3.
Yes, so the emissions that we measure include a mixture. So we've got the fossil fuels, which is the gas and the diesel, they're scope 1, and the electricity is scope 2. So actually these scenarios don't align, because if we're looking at a building, it will have both. It will historically, for example, scenario 1, where we've got the major decarbonisation projects at our leisure centres. So we've got the White Horse Leisure and Tennis Centre and Wantage. They will originally have had gas and electricity. So they will have had scope 1 and scope 2, but these projects are removing the fossil fuels. So most of the scope 1 will disappear. And it will only be scope 2. Scope 3 are other things like the staff travel, like some contractor emissions, and also other things that we choose to measure, like the losses from the electricity transmission system and various things like that. So it's not an easy answer, I'm afraid.
Yeah, thank you. I think I was just thinking about so when we get to the conclusion of our discussion here, there could be potential scope for setting targets that relate to, because I think we have much more control over scope 1 and 2 than we do 3 potentially. Anyway, just a thought that I was just throwing in there, but thank you for answering the questions. So I will take us to Councillor Sarah James next.
Hi, thank you, Chair. Yeah, thanks very much for this report. It's really good. I really enjoyed it, and I'm particularly excited by the glide path tool, and that it allows us to sort of look ahead and plan and see what the actual potential of decisions could be. I think that's just so helpful. I know you qualify it as being a bit of a prototype with somewhat limited functionality, but already it seems to convey so much information in this report for us to discuss. On the recommendations we're making, I have got quite strong views on those, but I think perhaps we're going to come back to that, so I'll just ask some questions now, if that's all right. So
definitely.
In scenario 3, the option of building a 2 megawatt solar farm, is there a couple of questions about that? Does that size include additional, is that sufficient capacity to cover additional electricity demand from the council if we deal with other things by electrifying them? So like if we're also going to be using electricity more for heating pools and buildings, and if we do manage to electrify the waste fleet, is that sufficient size, or is that sized for kind of our current electricity emissions? And then sort of regardless of the answer to that, could we just go bigger on that, perhaps by seeking community investment? I know community funded bonds in renewable energy have been really quite popular in the past. Speaking as a Westmill Solar bond holder, which community owned in Vale of Whitehorse, and whether there's we could just go larger, and whether that in fact then we could use that to offset beyond our own electricity use as well.
Thanks, really good questions. So our property team are looking at potential sites that we own. So we're obviously constrained by the size of those, how big we can go. So I'm answering your second question first. But if we had a site that was larger than was needed for our own emissions, we have sought advice on this, and potentially because a larger farm would help offset district emissions, that would be something the council could consider. So I think as and when we ascertain whether we have any sites that are suitable, both options can be considered, one that matches our emissions and one that is larger. So great question. Yeah, I'm going to hold my hand up. The 2 megawatts is very indicative and probably is more aligned to current electricity use. However, we hope that as our electricity use increases, as we go on to heat pumps and things like that, at the same time we will be more efficient in other ways because we're also implementing energy efficiency measures. So that kind of covers our buildings, but you are right that the waste vehicles would be a whole new scenario. And again, we might be looking at other opportunities for providing the solar energy for those. Maybe they would be on a site that had some solar energy itself, and so may not need to be captured by this project. So very much it is all up in the air, but you're right, it might not be large enough.
Thank you. Yes, and thank you for your questions, Councillor James. And you're right to hold back on the next part, because I should say on this item, I think this is potentially the most important item we have on the agenda this evening. So and we have a very full agenda, but I'm happy to take the time on this particular item because I think our recommendations are important for Cabinet. Yes, kind of the whole reason we have a Climate Emergency Advisory Committee. So members can put their hands up multiple times to either make points, or when we get around to it, what we think our recommendations will be in the next few minutes. So Councillor Robert Clegg next.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Heather. Can I just also pick up on the renewable energy, the solar farm? You say that it says in the report that initial findings indicate that land owned by us could be available. Do we have any idea what kind of land? Are we talking car parks or council-owned buildings, or is this agricultural lands that we might be building a solar farm on?
I'm not sure I'm able to comment at the moment. There are still all kinds of issues to be resolved on planning. We just want to get some early advice on various matters before we get people's hopes up and share information. Don, would you like to say anything on that?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that all of the things you've just mentioned are in scope, and there have been no conclusions yet. So there will be papers forthcoming over the next few months to clarify where we are, but we're not in a position to say any more about that at this stage. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kira Bentley, you have your hand raised, and so I don't know if you have an additional question, but if you could also at least read out the question that you've written in the chat as well.
Sure, I wasn't sure whether it was really a proper question in the chat. So
I think it's a good question. I think.
Okay, I'll go to my other question first, and then you can decide to come back to that one if you still like to. I just wonder, as this is about sort of considering recommendations, has it been modelled that you've chosen to have this meeting online? If we had all meetings online or something really dramatic like that and stopped all travel as we had to in the pandemic, more or less, obviously it'd be drastic and none of us like not meeting face to face, etc. But I wonder whether we could make a bit more effort. I understand it would have implications for the IT, and there are some things that need to happen face to face, but you know, we do all still come together for a lot of meetings, and we do travel a lot. I'm expected to travel a lot as chair.
So in this report, the things that have been modelled are the real big chunky things, and there are some slightly smaller areas of our emissions that have not been modelled, and that would be the mileage one would be one of those. So it's not really reflected in this report. It probably comes under the bit that's left over where we'd have to do some offsetting because we're assuming not all staff would have changed their vehicles. But yes, you're right. Hopefully in a further iteration, we can dig down a bit further into the slightly smaller areas and actions and give you some data.
Okay, thank you. And the question in the chat is, I'd just be interested to know if other councils are having to review their targets, and how do we compare if they are or even if they're not?
So
just before you answer that, sorry, I think Councillor Thomas did you want to come back on something on the first item?
Thank you, Councillor Gascoigne. I was just going to say that the reason why we don't meet on online is because we are not able to by national legislation. So that is sort of rules it out. I think there are varying views on people's preferences about meeting online, and definitely for this, as a committee, it's a brilliant way forward because as it's not something you're taking formal votes on, it can be online. National legislation says anything that does take formal votes cannot be online. So that's why. And I know it's been an issue for local councils to be lobbying for the potential of getting this changed since COVID. But yeah, I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Bethia. Yes, that's correct. And yes, something we could look at in the future is whether we involve ourselves in that lobbying. So sorry, Dominic, you wanted to come back on the question about other councils reviewing their targets.
So the answer to that was going to be yes. It's happening across the country at the moment. All the councils, particularly those that had particularly early targets, are clearly having to review the position they're in. The reasons they're reviewing it are probably quite obvious, because they're going to struggle to achieve the targets. So we're very much not alone in that. Your neighbours in South Oxfordshire are going through exactly the same process. I know West Oxfordshire are looking at it, so are Cherwell. I don't know. I don't think any of those have actually produced any reports or anything yet, but it is happening across the country. It's something we are aware of. So yes, very much not alone in that situation.
Thank you. And I honestly think that's really helpful context. So I do think it's a good question, Councillor Bentley, because yeah, it can feel like, you know, we set these targets and for a reason. We want to improve our carbon footprint and be a good council. So it can feel it doesn't feel good, right, to what sort of feels like peddling back. But in the context of, if everybody's doing this, there's good reason. I think we're doing our best. And just before I move on, I'd like to say, so I was part of the committee that set these targets. So something that also Councillor De La Hart mentioned earlier, and I think we were right to set targets, but we did that without any. It was early days, or we didn't have evidence. We didn't have the report that the officers have kind of put together today, because we were in a very different place then. That set us on our path, and then where we are today is we have the tools and the evidence to properly evaluate that, and that's the situation we're in today. So so that's kind of the context of where it's come from and why we have to look at it again today. When we set them, we were just trying to be ambitious without any evidence at the time to back that up. But where we are today is we have a great climate team that can look at all of that stuff for us, and we are much further ahead than we were back then. Perhaps then we might have been if we hadn't have set ourselves on that path, is my view. Okay, so thinking about how to draw this conversation to its conclusion. So firstly, are there any other kind of comments or questions about clarity before I kind of ask everybody for their opinion on what we should be recommending at this time? Okay, I can't see any further questions. In that case, I would like to ask any of the members, and even if you've spoken before now, for their opinion on where they think we should take our targets. And just to remind everybody, the recommendations or options in the report, and I'm just scrolling to it now, is we can. Here we go. So we could recommend that the Cabinet chooses to retain the current target, which, to remind you, is carbon neutral by 2030 in our operations and 75% by 2025, which is next year. Or we could drop the interim and maintain the carbon neutral by 2030. Or we could drop the targets altogether and recommend something different. So who would like to speak now? Councillor Clegg has his hand up first.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Eric De La Hart already made this point, but I agree with it wholeheartedly. Can you hear?
I can hear you. Or I could hear you.
Keep the interim targets, but to change the value attached to it. So rather than a 75% reduction, sorry, I'm trying to find. Rather than keep that 75% reduction, we change it to something that is still ambitious but is achievable, because it's clear from the report that 75% by 2025 is not achievable.
Okay, do you have a value that you would like for the interim target? Sorry.
I think Councillor Dillahart mentioned 40%. That seems reasonable to me, but I'm happy to be persuaded that it should shift a little one way or another.
Okay, so what I just heard from Councillor Clegg to back brief on that would be change the interim target to something more achievable, so such as 40%, and maybe keep the carbon neutral by 2030. So that's a suggestion that Councillor Clegg has made. Also, I believe that Councillor Dillahart agrees with. Councillor James.
Hello, yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, firstly, I was going to say on, so before that recommendation, we've got a recommendation before us that says CEEAC recognises the significant progress made in reducing our operational carbon emissions by 47% since 2009-10. And firstly, I'd like to say I don't support us making that comment or recommendation to Cabinet. Actually, I think this report is really about how we've done since we set these targets since 2019, and it's clear in the report that actually it's a much smaller reduction since then. It's 16%. I mean, it is great that we've cut our emissions 47% since 2009 and 10, but I feel that actually in terms of communicating to residents and to members how we're doing, that's sort of by the by. It's not really what this report is about. It's not really about what we're looking at here. It actually just sort of muddies the water and confuses things. And in practice, you can see on the sort of greenhouse gas emissions reporting data, a huge chunk of that is in scope 2. A huge chunk of that is just because the grid has decarbonised massively in that timescale. It's not actually because of our council action. So I don't think it really tells us anything useful or helpful about our own progress or steps we need to take going forward and what works and what doesn't work. So I would really prefer we drop that. I mean, perhaps we could have an alternative and recognise the significant amount of actions that we have taken towards reducing our operational carbon emissions, including actions that have already been taken and actions that are in progress, committed and have funding secured, and that will substantially reduce particularly the emissions from our leisure centres. And we could note that previously that was the largest part of our operational emissions when this was first looked at. So that is significant. We've taken the biggest thing and made big progress on it, which is fantastic. And we could also recognise that we've brought in the prototype glide path tool to enable us to actually model and record this progress in much clearer detail before. But I really think as it stands, I just think it's sort of muddying the waters. It almost looks a bit like trying to make ourselves almost a bit like look over here rather than look here at what we're doing now. And I'm not really happy about it. On the second recommendation, the one that Councillors De Harp and Clegg have also commented on, I'm certainly not happy that we just dropped the interim target for a 75% reduction. I mean, I can clearly see we're not going to make that now, but it seems, again, it's not transparent and it doesn't help residents understand how we're doing. It doesn't help us either understand how we're doing, where things actually are really hard. And I'm not surprised, I mean, it is such a hard thing to do because otherwise, frankly, we wouldn't be in this global mess by now if this was, people could sort this out in 5 years easily. And so I'm really not happy that we just dropped the interim target. I do think the suggestion of, I would be happier to leave it as it is now, but look at recommending new targets in future. So, I mean, we've got a motion going to full council tomorrow, actually, that asks council to consider using smart targets. And I think, my understanding is that councils where they have been successful have often used smart targets, so them looking at specific, measurable, achievable and relevant and time-bound actions that will deliver specific chunks. And I think smart targets, and now we've got the glide path, they seem very possible to to create and monitor, that is the way to go. So I really don't think we should be dropping the interim target until we've got a realistic target and we actually know what a realistic target is, to replace it. So I don't think we can say that number in this meeting tonight, actually. Now, it might be that the number is something like taking the sort of maxed out scenario 4 glide path that we've got in our report here, where we sort of do everything that we think we can do, and recognising that this is not something that is funded, but that we, as a committee charged with looking at our progress on our climate change actions, this is a recommendation that we make to Cabinet that these should be our targets, because they are, at least in theory, achievable, and then obviously it's a decision for Cabinet and Council as to whether we can actually take those steps.
Okay, thank you, Councillor James. I appreciate those comments, and I'd had and it was interesting that you raised the first point about the recommendation, because you're right, I had been focusing on the target element and had glazed over that, not deliberately, just because I thought the target was the more important discussion, but you raise a valid point. On the point you have mentioned about the targets and potentially keeping it the same, I'd had a similar thought, because what I couldn't tell from the report, there's a section at the end of the report and end of all reports that talks about implications, and what wasn't clear to me was what would be an implication of keeping a target and then not meeting it, because I think the report shows we're not likely to meet the interim target. So what's the kind of risk that we open ourselves up to? Because we're not sort of legally bound to deliver the target, because these are just targets we've set ourselves. So I don't know if one of the officers has a comment on replying to what Councillor James just said, but also my point about the risk of keeping the same target.
On the risk front, I think it's purely a risk, reputational risk, if the councils seem to miss a target and not said something about it or tried to do something to correct it. And that's part of the purpose of this report in bringing it to you, was because we recognised we weren't on track to meet that 75% target. We could set an alternative target, and taking your point about trying to use partly at least use the glide path to try and inform what a suitable date might be, we could do that as one option, and we could come back with a recommendation based on information we know. Obviously, a lot of the scenarios in this report are ones we haven't yet found. They're not funded. They're not yet in train. So it's a little bit difficult. But yes, we can do that. So it's the art of the possible. We can certainly set an alternative interim target to help, and that can be informed by what we know about our trajectory so far. So that's doable.
And we'd have to go back and do some work before, or you think we can do that tonight?
I don't think we can do that tonight, and unless Heather nods her head and I've got that very wrong, I think it's unlikely we'll be able to give you that as we speak. No, and she's not nodding her head, so I think.
Okay.
I think this report was actually written quite a long time ago, and it's taken us. There's been quite a delay before we brought it to you, so I wouldn't want to put my hand on my heart and say that everything in this report is the absolute latest information we have. So I wouldn't want to mislead you by taking this report as absolute gospel. By the time Cabinet meets in September, we should have made some iterations, so I don't know how that helps and whether discussions can be had with you, Hilly, before Cabinet, when we have looked again at the data.
It could be that if CEEAC were to recommend, and I'm not trying to lead you in any way here, but if you were to recommend that we go away and look at what is an achievable interim target, that obviously we could put in, we might be able to take that away and weave that into our thinking with the Cabinet report, which is due to go in September.
Okay, thank you for that. And just while we consider that, I can see a few more hands. Councillor James, your hand is still up. Did you want to sort of a right to reply to that?
Yes, please. Yeah. And I did want to say as well that, yeah, I also wouldn't want us to kind of like just miss 75% and not say anything about it. I mean, my twofold concern in dropping it is one is that we should replace it with something, and I actually joint scrutiny saw this last night. You know, they had like they were looking at the waste strategy and at the BIFA sort of contract report and things, and it's clear in things like that how important the fact that we've got climate targets and interim targets is in driving our work across the council, and driving the kind of KPIs and things that we then have. And we know that we've got various major contracts actually coming up within the relatively near future for the council, and so it is really important that we have these targets. And I mean, maybe we need more than one. Maybe we need to reassess what we think is realistic for 2025, but then also have another step to 2030 to drive that. But the second thing is not just about us reaching, having the right targets in order to drive the climate action. It's also that we shouldn't either drop it or miss it and not say anything. I think I totally agree, because that doesn't fit our ambition to be transparent. And I think we're all, the council's very committed to that. That's also in the current corporate plan, to act in a transparent and open way. And so I think we have to say, we missed it, this is why. Now we've got better data, this is what we think we can do. And and they are targets. I realise that as well. At this point there's no funding secured. There's not the resource yet, but we need to find what our most realistic and ambitious targets are, I think, because that's the only way we ever would find the funding. I mean, if we don't have a target, an ambitious target to cut our carbon emissions, what possible justification is there for the council to find funding or resource to achieve those things?
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think it ties into our corporate plan. And I think, yeah, if we have those things written in our corporate plan, then that's when we will deliver them. Okay, so a few more hands, and then we should look to come up with our final recommendation. And thank you for your patience. We have taken a while on this item, but as I say, I think it is one of the more substantial and more important for us to come up with a recommendation that we can have consensus on. So, Councillor Scott Houghton.
Thanks. Yeah, I think I'm again more or less echoing what's been said, but I certainly agree that we shouldn't just be dropping the interim target. If we're saying that the only real downside to missing the targets is negative publicity, I'd be interested to know what the negative publicity is of the press going, they've abandoned their climate targets that they're not going to meet. Whether we revise the targets to something achievable, or whether we leave them as is and make it quite public what has been done, what is still being done, and the reasons why we haven't been able to achieve the targets. I'm not yet decided. I've not yet made up my mind which I think is the better option, actually. But yeah, I just wanted to voice my opinion on those ones. I definitely don't think we should drop it. Whether we change it, whether we miss it and justify it, I'm not entirely sure.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bentley.
Thank you. I'm feeling like this target is a bit like a budget for the finance, as in you can change a budget and it's not the end of the world. As you know more information throughout the year and the situation changes, we should be changing it. As a new kid on the block and not understanding how this target was set in the first place, I'm very reluctant to change a target just because
we're not going to achieve it. And I did put a little question in the chat, but Dominic sort of answered it. Are we just changing this target because we know we're not going to hit it? And what does that really mean to the public? Are they going to get really hot under the collar because we've either missed a target or changed a target? I'm not sure the public are that much engaged. It saddens me to say. A lot of people say, oh, it's a waste of money anyway, but then we get other people who are passionate about it and think we should be pushing. So, as someone who speaks to their ward members, I'm getting a very mixed picture of what they're expecting us to do. So I think whatever we decide, we need to be brave and understand the full implication. I do understand now, thank you, Heather, for explaining that when we set the targets, we didn't really understand what we were measuring. And there's no shame in that. I'd be quite happy to speak to a member of the public and say, well, when we set the targets, we didn't have a baseline, and now we have a baseline, and therefore we need to set realistic targets. But I also think there's no shame in not hitting the target if we understand that we had no baseline when we set the targets. So I feel a little bit conflicted, and it feels a bit defeatist to change the target. Drop the target completely? Might we lose focus? Are we then likely to hit the by dropping the interim target? Are we less likely to hit the end of day target? I don't have an answer, but I just thought I'd raise those dilemmas.
Thank you, Kira. I think, there's a few things to consider here, and it is a bit difficult. Councillor Thompson, and you're the last person, and then I would like for us to have a final recommendation.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I've just got two thoughts on this. The first is on the first recommendation. I kind of do agree with what Councillor James has said. I'm pleased that we're reduced by 47% since 2010. I don't mind it staying in there, but I do think I'd like to add some clarity about what's happened since 2019 in the recommendation itself. So we could say continued downward trajectory, 16% since 2019. I think that should go in the recommendation. The second thing I would say is, I think the idea of officers potentially going away and coming back to us with some scope about what's a plausible interim target, maybe post the council resolution we've got tomorrow at full council, would be a good thing. I think I'd also suggest, because oddly I was also in that meeting, I've just come back to CEEAC, but I was in that meeting when we set this initial target. I would suggest that I know there's something nice about 25-30, but I do wonder whether we maybe want to set an objective for interim, which is between those dates now. So whether we want to be looking at setting an objective for 2027 or even 2028. So again, I think I'd be quite keen that we have officers go away, come back with a plausible recommendation, but I'd be keen to have an interim target of 3 years' time and then 6 years' time, rather than thinking about what's plausible by next year, which is very, very soon. So that's just where I am.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for your comments. I'm going to attempt now to bring it all together. So what I heard on the first recommendation was two comments. So Councillor James raised it and Councillor Thompson agreed, is that in the interests of being more transparent and sincere about what we have achieved, and we've done really well. I think it's something we can really be proud of, but I think in light of the comments, perhaps we could be more descriptive, because we've about what our actions have helped achieve. So I think we should alter that recommendation, and Councillor Thompson's suggestion was to keep those words, but to add in the additional point about what we have achieved since the 2019 figure, I believe. I can see nods from Max. Okay. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing about the targets. Heard quite a few things this evening. And I think my thoughts on it, having heard what everybody said, is that it doesn't feel good to just drop a target simply because we can't meet it, and that doesn't sort of align with our values of being open and transparent. And if we're talking about reputational risk, then actually maybe sort of deleting or changing history almost is worse than actually getting to that point and then saying, look, we didn't meet it, and these are the reasons why. And as we've all discussed many times this evening, there are reasons why, and there's the additional context of when we set the targets. So personally, I would be in favour, and I think what I've heard tonight from lots of people is the same, that we don't drop the interim target at this time. But what we could recommend is that officers come back with a more realistic interim target that wouldn't be next year because that is too soon, as Max pointed out, that perhaps looks at a realistic interim target that we can set with the knowledge of everything we know now, using these tools that have more scientific evidence behind them. So looking at maybe 2028, so still ahead of our net zero target, with something that's more realistic, and then we can report against that at that time. That is what I'm going to suggest, and that is what I think brings together a lot of the comments that I've heard this evening from across the different members. Okay, I can see general agreement. If anybody disagrees, perhaps say now.
I don't disagree, Hayley, but I'd just like to clarify that potentially staff performance reviews might be dependent on hitting targets. And if we are not changing a target, I don't know if that's the case or not. And perhaps Dominic would be able to fill in, but maybe that consideration needs to be handed down as well, down that chain of performance reviews. That's all.
Yeah, perhaps we can clarify that. But I think when I asked what the risk was of keeping it, nobody mentioned the performance review. But let's just check that now.
I think there is no risk in that basis. I'm not aware that, I mean, certainly none of my team have performance review targets based around our corporate targets, because that would be entirely unfair, because our team is a very small part of this whole thing. The activity is going on across the organisation. So yeah, that wouldn't be a problem at all.
Thank you. Candida, were you able to note down from what I said what the recommendations from our committee are? And then if so, could you read them back to us, and just we can check that we all agree with that and we have consensus?
Okay, so for recommendation A in the report, you may want to be exact about your wording, but I've written down that the committee is asked, in order to be more transparent about achievements, can this recommendation be more descriptive about what we have achieved as a council, to add in an additional point about the 2019 onwards achievements? Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. I also put then the committee's conclusions for recommendation B in the report are that members were reluctant to drop the interim target. Members suggested that officers find, I might want to change that, but a more realistic interim target that we can set with the knowledge and tools already gained. And possibly the target could be 2027 to 28 rather than 2025.
Yeah, that's what I said, and I think I can see agreement across our members. Okay, nodding, good, excellent. Okay. Oh, Councillor James.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say that on the recommendation, the first one, since we're sort of specific on the numbers, that we've cut the carbon emissions by 47% since 2009-10, I think that would be better balanced up if, as Councillor Thompson suggested, we also have, as part of the, what we've achieved since 2019, we also have the percentage reduction achieved since 2019, which is in the report. I think it's 16%. Because otherwise I feel like there might be like one sort of fact in there and then some narrative stuff, and the fact might stand out a little bit falsely.
Yeah, so I agree with you, Councillor James. Sorry. Yeah, thanks for being precise on that. Yes, I agree. We should have both figures so they are side by side.
So,
yeah.
percentage reduction since 2019 as well as an addition.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. Fabulous. We can close that agenda item there. Thank you, everybody, for your patience on that one. It was long, so we should note that we've just finished agenda item 8, and we do have 14 in total, and we're halfway through the time that we usually allow for this meeting. So just to note that, but I do think that was worth getting that specific agenda item right. Okay, so we can move on to agenda item 9, which is similar, but is slightly different. And for this, we have Jessie to introduce the review of the district net zero target.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to give an update on the progress that has been made towards our district-wide net zero target. Just to remind you, that's to be a net zero carbon district by 2045, and then there's an interim target to reduce emissions by 75% by 2030. So hopefully you've had a look in the paper. The data in the paper is from 2021 greenhouse gas emissions data published by the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. And at the time of writing, that was the latest data that was published by the department. There is now, a couple of weeks ago, they released the 2022 data, so we will be updating it in the coming weeks, but we didn't have time to do that before this meeting. But just to explain that, so this shows that there was an 880 kilotons of carbon dioxide emitted from sources in the Vale of White Horse during 2021. These were mainly from transport, domestic energy, agriculture and industry. Worth noting, actually, just going back to the new data that is available, although obviously the figures will have changed a little bit, I've had a look at it, and there is not really a significant shift. So we can kind of base the discussion on the 2021 figures and be assured that the 2022 figures are not dissimilar. So if we continue to decarbonise the district at the same rate, in 2030, which is the date of the interim target, the total emissions will have fallen by around 55% compared to the 2008 baseline. Now, this, just based on the discussion you were just having, just to give a little bit of an explanation around this. Originally, when the target was set, it was agreed to use the 2017 baseline for district-wide emissions, which was set out in a report done by the consultants ETHA. However, when we tried to replicate the methodology that was used in that report, we were not able to do so because we didn't have all the data available. And since that work has been done, there's been Oxfordshire-wide data published, and all the other councils in Oxfordshire are using a 2008 baseline, which is why we decided to use that here. However, we could go back and calculate using this new methodology rather than the ETHA one. We could go back and calculate a 2017 baseline, but I don't have that data at the moment. So just to kind of explain that. So going back to where I was before, if we look further forward, we know from Oxfordshire-wide figures that we need to reduce our district-wide emissions at roughly double the speed they currently are to reach net zero by 2050, that is, let alone our 2045 target. So we haven't been able to do the same level of granular tracking as we did using the glide path tool for the district emissions, but we do know the kind of overall rate of progress, and unfortunately it's not fast enough. However, the difference with this report is that the majority of these emissions are not within the council's control, and obviously we do have an important role in reaching the district target, but it's not within our gift completely, and it relies on everyone else also making changes, so it is much harder to be precise in that respect. For that reason, we have very much focused our efforts as a team and a council in reducing district-wide emissions by working in partnership with our neighbouring councils and other stakeholders, particularly by playing our part in the delivery of the Oxfordshire Net Zero Route Map and Action Plan. So this sets out milestones that we need to reach in terms of sort of carbon, amount of carbon reduced each year. Yeah, so that's kind of the kind of path we're taking in terms of working towards this. We can have a much bigger impact working in partnership with others. So going back to our targets, similarly to the previous discussion, we have got to formally recognise that we are not going to meet the interim aspirational target of a 75% reduction in district carbon emissions by 2030, and that we will have to significantly accelerate our rate of decarbonisation to meet our 2045 target. However, we do not believe that this is impossible at this stage. It's tricky to give a certain answer, but it's far enough in the future that there is scope to accelerate that action. So our proposal today is that CEEAC should recommend to Cabinet that the Council reaffirms its commitment to reaching net zero carbon emissions across the district by 2045. This remains more ambitious than the 2050 national target, but recognising that we can only do much within our sphere of influence, we do think this is potentially realistic. There is the option of maintaining the interim target or dropping it, and that is up for discussion. Following the discussion today, we will take CEEAC's recommendation to Cabinet in September, and I will be doing the modelling to use those latest 2022 figures before that meeting in September. And we will also, from now on, obviously be doing this every year so we can track the progress much more accurately. I hope that makes sense. Sorry, it's quite technical, but happy to try and answer any questions.
Thank you, Jessie. Thank you for presenting that to us. So I think as before, as it kind of panned out, I think the best way to tackle this discussion, and now we have the context of the first paper to help us, is for first any kind of questions or clarification around what's in the report, and then I will take some comments on what our recommendations should be. So firstly, let's take those comments, questions of clarification. So Councillor Clegg, you're first.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Jessie. I have two questions, quite small. Figure 3, there appears to be a collapse of commercial emissions around 2017, 2018. There is a bit of an uptick in industrial emissions. What's the story there? Why did commercial emissions collapse? Was it a case of reassigning the label? Can you give some more detail on that? My second question is around the report from Ether Consultants, who said that the officers were unable to replicate their methodology. Have lessons been learned from that from a procurement perspective? Are we writing contracts a little differently nowadays so that we are able to replicate methodology in future? Thank you.
In terms of your first question, I would have to go back and look at the data. I'm not sure about that. This is all nationally sourced data, so it's not something that we kind of hold or is from our records, but so I'd have to go away and have a look at that again. In terms of the second one, yes, definitely. There's now a different methodology that we're using, which is we've been given free of charge, which we can just do every year ourselves. So we're not intending to go back and kind of replicate it, because if we can do it in-house, then that seems to be a more sensible approach. But certainly for any future procurement, we will be bearing that in mind.
Thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Thompson.
Thanks. It's a really quick question for me. I just want to confirm that now we're modelling this annually. Is this going to come before CEEAC every year from now on, like just in terms of how we're doing on this?
Yes, I think that is the yeah. Yes.
Great, perfect. Thank you.
Cool. Councillor Bentley.
Thank you. Appreciative of the fact things are out of our control, though not out of our region. How do we account for that? Like, I don't need a detailed model, but I'm thinking things like the reservoir build. If potentially we're going to have, you know, trucks, hundreds of trucks coming in weekly, have we looked at that? And is that a reason for us to be making comment?
I don't think we can kind of measure at that level of granularity for district level emissions. That should be a factor in the decision for that particular project or whatever. It's not our decision, I know for that one, but it's not something that we would be able to capture in this data, I think. Dom, is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that obviously the reservoir issue is an entirely separate one to what we're doing here, and these are nationally produced statistics. I don't know to what extent DESNZ actually look at individual projects in a district to inform their data. I suspect they don't. They'll have a formula to work this out. Practically, we have no way of measuring it as a district. We simply don't have the resources to do that. The best measures we have available are those that were produced by the Oxfordshire Net Zero Route Map and Action Plan. And that was an enormous piece of work, and again was mostly based on, I don't know why I'm pointing, was mostly based on national data. So it's it's not something that we have the capacity or ability to measure it to the degree of granularity that you're talking about.
Is that something we sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say there is a significant time delay in this data. So we are only just getting the figures for 2022 now, which makes it quite difficult to kind of track progress in that respect.
And perhaps for Dominic again, is that something then that we should be asking Thames Water about? Is the impact to our green?
We've gone a bit off course here from what we're talking about, but that is one of the considerations. So the consultants working for Thames Water are looking at carbon emissions. I'll put that one aside because I think that's not related to the conversation we're currently having.
Thank you. And Councillor James.
Thank you. Yeah. So first, I'd like to speculate that maybe commercial activity collapsed. The reason the footprint's gone right down is maybe that was the closure of the coal-fired power station at Didcot. I'm not sure if that would have gone under commercial or not, but that would have been a substantial difference, I think, in our area. And then my question is, I see we've got the figures for the sort of the average emissions per person, and ours are quite high compared to our region and high compared to England. Do we know why?
No, we don't have any information about that, but yeah, they are higher than some of our neighbours as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I actually had that same question, Councillor James. So I think if there is a way to find that out
we can look into
that. I guess we have to know the methodology. Yeah, just because I think knowing that could help inform things like our climate action plan and that sort of stuff. I think it's quite interesting. Okay. Okay. We have. Dominic, do you want to come back on that?
No, just an observation on that. I know that Cherwell has a similar problem, Cherwell District Council, and that's a lot to do with the M40, which goes right through Cherwell, right. And significantly bumps up the emissions in their area. So I don't know whether it might be something similar for the Vale. I'm really not sure what causes that, but it's something we don't fully understand. So.
Yeah, it's tricky. Yeah, and obviously another one of those things that's difficult to have any control over, which I know we all know. Councillor De La Harpe.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was also wondering if being a rural district means that the emissions are higher because people have to travel further to get their shopping and a lot of tractors ploughing the fields and so on.
Yeah, I'm sure that's a factor as well.
Did you have anything more to add, Eric?
Sorry, no, I'll lower my hand. Oh, it's gone.
Okay, that's fine, no problem. Okay, we've taken quite a few comments and points of clarification there. So what I would like to move to now is what our thoughts are on the recommendations, and we now have the benefit of having had the previous discussion. So I would like to take thoughts now on what recommendations we could make to Cabinet about our net zero, district-wide net zero carbon target, which today stands at a 75% reduction by 2030, which the report notes we can't meet. And also the recommendation that we reaffirm our commitment to meeting the 2045 target, which is 5 years ahead of the county and the country. So thoughts on that? Okay, we first come to Councillor Thompson.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, I might be on my own on this, but I'll see where the discussion goes. But I'm actually less concerned about dropping the interim target on this one. I think that in hindsight, as much as we would have loved to have got 75%, it's so out of the control of the district that I think it is reasonable for us to recognise that it can't be met. But I do feel very strongly that I want to keep the 2045. But again, I will probably go with the majority, but that's my view on this.
So, Max, just to clarify then, are you saying we should drop it because we can't meet it, or keep it and not be worried about the fact that we can't meet it?
I'm saying I agree with the recommendation. We formally recognise it can't be met. And as such, I mean, I don't know whether that means we drop it, but I mean, I guess if we formally recognise it can't be met, my view would be then we should drop it, because if it's unachievable in that sense and we're formally recognising it, then I think it should be dropped. But that's just my view.
Thank you. Thanks for clarifying. Councillor Bentley. Oh, sorry, it's not you. I want to take these in order. Councillor James, you're next.
Thank you. So I do feel similarly to the last item. Actually, I do feel we shouldn't just drop it. What I think we should do is I think we should replace it with an actual plan. I think it'd be hopeless to have a net zero target of 2045 for the district, particularly because it's so out of our control, and expect us to achieve anything on that at all. I think it's so hard to have leverage on the district emissions that I think we need a really clear path actually of what's important and where emissions need to come down, so that we can be constantly looking at our policies and our resources and how we are working, and particularly how we're working with partners in order to kind of leverage whatever we can to bring those emissions down. What I would like to see us do is not drop that 75% target, but to say, I mean, I'm totally happy with this completely. In fact, I think we should sort of transparently say, we can't meet this and it's not in our control. But what I think we should do is actually come up with a plan with a lot more than one step on the way to 2045 that sets a sort of pathway. And I think we've got really good materials to do this. So already during the last 4 years with partners, we've got the Oxfordshire Net Zero route map and action plan. So we've got a plan for the county. I know that's aiming for 2050. So I mean, maybe we need to look at that. And if we're going to go for 2045, maybe we need to say why we're going to be sooner. But we can use that as a basis to say, so we need this sort of percentage of emissions cuts in our district each year. We need to be seeing these kind of levels of retrofit. We need to be seeing these kind of levels in changes in transport use. And I think that needs to be in our aims and targets as a council. So I realise that we can't have a target that says we are going to retrofit this many houses a year and retrofit them all. But I think we do need to have the targets and be measuring ourselves against, measuring the district against. Is it a place where that is happening? Is it a place where it isn't happening? What can we be doing to make more of that happen if we need to? So we've got the data there. I was also struck by the fact you said that you've got that the data's from 2008, the baseline, because that's what the county have worked together and produced. I'd be really happy to see us as well in revising these targets, revise it to something that's easier and works, and something that having worked with partners, we can report back on in a kind of regular way, in a way that doesn't mean our officers are spending their time on calculating sort of some bespoke figures to report to Vale, when there's an easier way that still gives us the information we need about what we're doing. I think I just really welcome us really leaping on what we've done already, particularly in the Oxfordshire Net Zero Route Map and Action Plan, to really clearly outline what the pathway for our district is. But I'm really unhappy. Without that being there, I'd be really unhappy about us dropping the 75% target at the moment, because to just say we're going to be net zero in 2045, I don't think that really means or will deliver anything on its own.
Okay, so thanks for those comments. So thinking about the recommendations that, if it was down to you, what you would make. So the ones we have there, you're not happy with those and you would like to add an additional one. Did I hear that?
Yes, I'm not happy with the first one, the recommendation to drop the interim target. I'd be happy to recommend that we replace that 75% interim target by looking at a pathway of targets. So I don't know whether every 5 years is appropriate or something like that. Using the work that we've already done with partners in the Oxfordshire Net Zero Route Map, and other things. I mean, there's, the Climate Change Committee have got a whole set of, budgets and actions for the country to get us to at least, sort of 78% reduction of emissions, and so on. So that's what. So I'm not happy with the first recommendation. I'd want to see a recommendation that the recommendation is that we replace it with a realistic set of targets that actually reflect the work that we have done already on actually mapping a pathway for the whole county. I am happy with the second recommendation. I'm happy that we say that we recommend the Cabinet reaffirms its commitment to accelerating it. But on its own, I think, if we don't do something else with the first recommendation, I just don't think it achieves anything.
Okay, I think I'm clear on your point now. Thank you for bringing it to what the recommendation could be. And I think that similarly, when we set these targets, like the first paper, the previous paper that we discussed, we set these targets without having all these tools that we now do have. So I think basically, similarly to the previous one, we can look at something that actually uses the evidence that we now have, which I think is what you have just said. But okay, there's a few more comments and then we can bring it to its conclusion.
Could I just say one thing on that? Just going back to Councillor James's point, sorry. Just on the having a plan thing, we will be talking about local area energy planning in the next item on the agenda, and I think that will be very relevant to that point. So we'll talk about that later.
Thank you. Councillor Bentley, your hand was up and then went down and back up, so I'm going to take you next.
I drew breath and then Jessie butted in, so thank you if I can. I'll keep it brief. I very much agree with previous councillors' input and Councillor James's suggestions for 1 and 2. I would just like to reiterate really how deeply uncomfortable I am with these targets, because it's so out of our control. And I think that point needs to be made very clearly when we're reviewing these targets, that anything can come along that is not, a national implication that we can't control and has got nothing to do with it. So we can retrofit a whole town with solar panels at great expense, which will make a minuscule difference to the motorway, for instance, or those kind of things. So I think we've got to be very clear of the difference of the targets. Whilst they feel quite similar on paper, they're quite different in content. That's my point.
Okay, so how does that make you feel about? So you're just saying, add the additional context of the fact that this thing isn't within our control, is not about, you're happy to keep the targets, but just be clear about the fact that we don't have the control.
Yeah, I think so. And I don't know if it's appropriate to put them in somewhere, but I just think if we make the recommendations for the first topic, and then this ends up being pretty similar, people will be like, well, it's just the same, they haven't hit the target, and they're wiggling out of the date or whatever it is. But actually these reasons are very different than the others.
Yeah, you're right. The additional context is important there, and then the two papers coming together, that nuance can be lost. Okay, Councillor Clegg.
Thank you, Chair. I wholeheartedly agree that we shouldn't be dropping the interim targets, but actually I have a different take on it being largely out of our control, in that we have a new national government, and that government will sit until 2029. Now, if we drop the interim target, then essentially we're saying to the national government, don't worry about it, we don't mind, it's fine, it's a problem for the 30s. We need an interim target, something that's realistic, so that we can use to lobby national government to say, help us achieve that, please. And so we need that, and potentially every 5 years, as something that we can take to national government to ask for their help in reaching our targets. So I would wholeheartedly agree that we should keep interim targets within that context.
Thank you. That's a useful comment. Finally, then, Councillor De La Harpe.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think in 2019 we didn't have an Oxfordshire net zero route map, and we do now. And thinking about what we can control and what county can control, I think the county can control a lot more than we can. My feeling is we should be open and transparent about why we're not able to achieve the 75% target, and then align ourselves with whatever targets the Oxfordshire net zero route map has. And as a way of committing ourselves to working in partnership with them and saying we're completely aligned with them.
Yeah.
Okay, Dominic.
Or they'll just be okay for one night.
There is a slight problem with that last point, because obviously the Oxfordshire Net Zero Route Map and Action Plan has a target of 2050, and there is no interim target. So it's not quite as straightforward as that, unfortunately.
Dominic, is there a way to use the information that's in the net zero, the pathway to net zero report, to create ourselves interim targets? Because that's what I'm hearing from all the members here, is basically what I've heard is 2045, great, we're ahead, we would like to be more ambitious, so 2045 is good, let's keep going with that. But there's this interim, 75%, it's not so realistic, plus it's not very in our control, we have all this new data. Is it possible for us to use that report to create ourselves a new realistic interim target?
I'm going to point to Jessie. I don't know where she is on your screens, but Jessie's going to come in on this one.
Yeah, so as part of that process, we did have some carbon budgets done at a district level. However, they were pretty rudimentary and basically just a kind of subdivision of the county-wide target. So we didn't feel very comfortable adopting them because we didn't understand well enough how they'd been calculated, and it was quite basic, basically. So there is that information. We can have another look into it, but in its current form, we didn't think it was of a high enough quality to kind of adopt ourselves.
Okay. Right. How do we bring together what everybody has, all the comments that have just been made into our recommendation? So I'm quite comfortable with the second recommendation, recommendation B. I think everybody who I've heard speak, and myself included, I think we are comfortable with reaffirming our commitment to a 2045 target. And actually, as Councillor Clegg pointed out, any kind of ambitious target we do have does give us some leverage when lobbying a government, particularly a new one. So I'm happy with recommendation B, and I don't think we need to make any changes to that. What I'm kind of toying with is what to do about recommendation A, which is the currently as written, recognises that the interim aspirational target of achieving a 75% reduction in district carbon emissions by 2030 cannot be met. because what I'm worried about is whether we do that, whether it means we drop the target or we keep it. There's quite the gap between 2030 and 2045, and then how we actually reach ourselves to, like, how do we use it to leverage with any of our partners, whether it is county or government, to actually make us reach the 2045 target. So I am quite in favour of having some realistic interim, a kind of plan, as Councillor James said, and maybe this does feed into the next agenda item, as Jessie kind of pointed out. I guess I'm kind of searching here for what our recommendation A should be. And are there any kind of suggestions from any members? Councillor Thompson, thank you.
It's all right. I guess, is it not about inserting a recommendation, right? So we acknowledge we can't meet 75 and it can't be met, but rather than dropping the interim target, it's about inserting an extra recommendation, asking officers to potentially come back and present on, with all of the different projects going on, what interim targets, or maybe a framework for interim targets. So it sounds like actually what we need is another recommendation slapped in the middle, rather than getting rid. Clearly we're keeping B, but rather than getting rid of A, don't we need a second, another recommendation would be what I'd suggest. That would be something about having officers saying we believe in an interim target, but we'd like to have something a bit more plausible and concrete based on the new evidence we've got and all the new plans going on. But I don't know if that would meet what's been discussed thus far.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, I can see nods, and I agree. I think what I'm just concerned about is the officers saying that the data that they have at the moment maybe isn't concrete enough. Is that correct, Jessie?
That we have at the moment, but we could go away and do some more research. There are, so I think what you're asking for basically is a carbon budget for every 5 years up to 2045. There is kind of national tools that do that, which might be sufficient for us. We have discussed it quite a lot in the past, and we could commission a carbon budget as well. But the more we do that kind of thing, the less time we have to spend on actually delivering. This is the kind of toss up between the two. So, but we can go away and have a look and find out what we can do.
There would be some practical challenges with that in terms of getting a paper ready for a September cabinet as well. I don't think that there is sufficient time to do that. Now, one of the reasons we're bringing this item to you now is obviously there will be new corporate plans coming forward in October. And we wanted to try and align the setting of targets or any amendments to targets with what ends up in the new corporate plans. So I'm not, as an officer thinking about the resources we have, I'm not convinced we have the time during the summer period to do a significant piece of work to understand carbon budgets. We could do that for another year, and bearing in mind we are some way off these targets, it could be that we look at this in a future year. I'll leave that with you to mull.
Okay. Okay, then what I would like to propose, I think if we are to reach 2045 and not just hope that we get to it without any sort of planning, we do kind of need these interim. So I think I will include that in our recommendations, but recognising that resources are constrained and understanding that it won't be possible to do that by the September cabinet, or maybe even not by the corporate plan. But 2045 is a long time away, and I think even if it's not possible to have it, this year, then it's still going to be useful for the council, whoever those employees and councillors will be in those years to come. I think I would feel more comfortable that this committee recommends that. And in any case, it's up to the cabinet what they decide. But I think what we've discussed today is that we would be more comfortable if there was interim carbon budget on the way to 2045, and I think that should be the recommendation. Councillor James.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I've just opened the net zero route map, I mean, it does have some really high level stuff in there, like a sort of a route map overarching all sectors, and it says, you know, this percentage in this sector by 2030 and so on, and 2040, 2050. So I know it's aiming for 2050, and I know it's very sort of top level, but is it not? Would something like using something like that still not be an improvement on our 75% that before any of this sort of work had been done was picked on? I mean, and I do think Councillor Clegg's point was excellent, that we've got a new government that actually even already has made quite significant changes to things like offshore wind planning rules and things like that just straight away. I think we can hope that we might be in a different climate now as well for actually tackling this. So
pun intended.
Yeah, that's my yes. Indeed, I wish it was. That's my suggestion, is that even that rather than doing a detailed piece of work on carbon budget, which I quite appreciate is probably not the best use of your time or realistic in any way, that even to take some of the quite generalised stuff that is in things like this, or possibly in the climate change committee sort of budget reports, is still an improvement and still a much better thing to have in place than the nothing or the 75%, which isn't realistic or helping us now.
Yeah. Dominic, do you have a comment on that?
No, I mean, I think we can go away and come up with something, as long as members appreciate it will be our best guesstimate based on what we can see from PASCO, and which is informed by a high level of analysis, as Sarah said, but it will be a guesstimate, and as long as you're comfortable with that, I'm sure we can come up with an alternative interim target which we can include in a recommendation to Cabinet. Okay,
Councillor Bentley, and then we'll wrap up this item.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I see a lot of nods there. We're all agreed that an informed guess on a FAG paper is better than what we've got at the moment, which is slipping targets and nothing else to go by. And nobody wants officers to be spending endless hours chomping bits of paper because it's more accurate. When the outcome is actually going to be the same, we're all going to keep trying for better figures to make that 2045 target. So yeah, I think we're pretty much on the same page there.
Okay, great. Okay, in that case then I'm going to suggest that on this item we have the recommendations that are in the paper, A and B, but that we insert an additional recommendation that we set new interim targets that are every 5 years based on data that we already have available in the PASCO report. That is definitely, well, we don't need to include this bit, but the reason is that is more accurate than what we are already basing it on, even if it's not. We can't know everything. So, Candida, have you got that?
Sorry for the delay. I'm clicking between typing on different.
That's okay.
Different things. So yes, I've got that because you've just said that. I don't know if you want me to repeat back what I've got, but it seems pretty clear. I can just say that you happy with the two recommendations, and that there will be an additional recommendation put in the notes here that says you recommend setting new five-yearly interim targets based on the data in the PASCO report.
Thank you. Great, thank you, and well done, everyone. We're making it through this agenda today. Thank you, Jessie, and thanks all the members for your comments, really helpful. So that was agenda item 9. Agenda item 10 is local area energy planning, and we have Jessie to introduce this item.
Yeah, hi, sorry, I'm just going to make sure I've got the right thing in front of me. Yeah, okay, so I'm now going to talk about local area energy planning. This is just an information item, so I'll go really quickly because I know we've already running out of time a bit. So this links very closely to the Oxfordshire Net Zero Route Map and Action Plan, as it was one of the priority work streams identified in that. And since then, we have been working very closely with colleagues across the county to develop a local area energy planning programme. This is being led by Oxfordshire County Council, but we are very, very close partners in it. Just to give a very brief introduction, a local area energy plan, or a LEAP, as I'll call it from now on, is a spatial plan which maps all of the existing energy infrastructure of an area, and then it evaluates the future and current energy demand and proposes a range of possible scenarios and technologies that are needed to deliver a net zero energy systems. So there is no statutory duty on local authorities to have a local area energy plan, but there are a number of reasons why we are pursuing this. The first links very closely to what we've just been talking about, which is that we don't currently have a detailed plan of the changes that we need to the electricity system to get to net zero in the district by 2045, and this will give us that plan. It's not for all district emissions, but it's for quite a lot of them. It links into retrofitting, it links into lots of other like electrification of vehicles and all of that kind of stuff. So it is one way that we can, as a council, influence reducing district-wide emissions, and should give us a lot of very useful information on that. The second reason is that we know that major updates are needed to our energy system to reach net zero. We already are facing long delays for some renewable energy projects. Farringdon Leisure Centre is one example there, and it's very frustrating waiting for grid connections, and there's long delays. So the LEAP process will provide us a plan of action that is needed to transition to that net zero energy system. It will also provide this information to the distribution network operators, the energy companies, about where upgrades are needed and when they will. So this will allow them to do more targeted investment, and it will give them the information to be more systematic about how they allocate grid capacity rather than the current first come first serve basis. It will identify most suitable solutions for local areas, and where there isn't grid capacity, it will also identify alternative solutions such as the use of battery storage and renewable generation. So it will give us that information about what is the best solution for each area. And finally, it will be useful to us as the local planning authority to help create an environment in which the policies in the joint local plan can be delivered. So if the joint local plan goes ahead as is currently drafted, we have very strong ambitions about delivering net zero homes, and we need to make sure that there is sufficient grid capacity to deliver those. If we progress as we expect, going forward from now, the proposal is to contract consultants to produce a LEAPs for the whole of Oxfordshire. The first stage of that, so there's some guidance that's published by the Energy Systems Catapult, which is sort of recognised as the right way to do a LEAP, and that splits into 7 stages. And the first half of that we'll be doing at an Oxfordshire-wide scale to give us the economies of scale and the kind of savings on that. And then the second half of it, the more detailed scenario and action planning will be done at a district scale. So the Vale will get its own LEAP. There will also, alongside the sort of consultants doing that, there will be work across the county to build up local authority in-house capacity and expertise. It's a very technical subject, and we are all learning about it at the moment. But by having this kind of building this expertise means we won't have to pay expensive consultants to update the plan every 3 to 5 years. In terms of how this is being funded, the Future Oxfordshire Partnership has already allocated £150,000 from the Oxfordshire Growth Capacity Fund to the LEAP process, and a further bid has been submitted for an additional £450k from the same fund. And we're waiting for a decision about this, which is going to be made at the FOP meeting on the 30th of July. There is no district council expenditure proposed for the creation of the LEAPs, but it will take staff resource mainly from our team, the climate team. And so to manage the uncertainty about this staff resourcing, there are 2 stage gates proposed in the kind of time frame, so that the district has the option of continuing or not to the next stage based on whether we think we can resource it. If the budget decision at FOP gets approved, the procurement of the Oxfordshire LEAPs will be led by the County Council, and we will be closely feeding into that. The procurement specification is being developed at the moment, ready to go out to market in the middle of August, and then hopefully appoint consultants in November. there will be opportunities for members of CEEAC to feed into the process, particularly in that district scenario planning and prioritisation stage, which we expect to be in spring next year. And then if it all goes to plan, we will have a local area energy plan for the Vale in September 2025. That was a very whistle-stop tour, but I'm happy to try and answer any questions, or we can get back to you afterwards if that's quicker. I know we're running out of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessie, for taking us through the item. And obviously there's even more information in the report, which I'm sure the members have read. And obviously this is a for information item. We don't need to make any recommendations, but just from my own point of view, I've done a fair bit of reading around this topic, and I actually think it's super important. And I know you said we're not committing any funds at the moment. Obviously the officer time is there, but I think it's, my personal view is that it's well spent time, because I don't think we can hope to reach net zero without doing this kind of work and having a kind of, it's basically kind of a strategy, a plan to deliver net zero and have energy planning in place. We couldn't do it piecemeal. You kind of need this district-wide situation. So yes, I'm really happy that we're working towards this as Oxfordshire. And if I can just ask a question before I take questions from the other members. Future Oxfordshire Partnership was mentioned as the body that's asking for the funding to do this. I mean, it's hard to speculate, and maybe you won't have the answer, but if there was no FOP, because I think FOP was originally created for the growth deal, and the growth deal's kind of coming to its natural conclusion now. Do you see this as a problem for the LEAP, or do you think it's something that like county will just lead on without the presence, if there was no presence of FOP? And perfectly fine if you don't have the answer to that question.
I don't know the answer to that, but the county have invested in their own energy planning team who are leading this work. So it's they are leading it rather than FOP, but the funding is coming from FOP.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay, let's take some questions from the members then. Councillor Bentley.
Thank you. My question is around the funding. What happens if we don't get the other 150 on the 30th of July, please?
We will have to go back to the drawing board. The specification that's being drawn up at the moment is based on the fact that we will get that funding. It has already been gone through the various levels of governance and been approved by senior officers, senior executive officers, and the FOP infrastructure advisory group. But obviously we don't know for certain until it's gone to the FOP meeting about whether we will get it.
Councillor James.
Thank you. Yeah, I wondered, is there any sort of attempt to map demand? I was thinking particularly in my ward, or part in my ward, there's some very big energy users on Hull campus, particularly Rutherford Appleton Lab. And I know that for some years they've been looking at the fact that they're going to have to get some grids, they're going to have to get more grid electricity in to, you know, build new science facilities that are on the cards sort of within the next 5 to 10 years, I think. Does that kind of come into the LEAP as well, that kind of demand?
Definitely. So we will be using data from the that's provided by the energy companies as like the baseline, and then there'll be a lot of stakeholder engagement with and we will be providing as much information about the known plans in the district, and that will all feed into this, and it will all be in one place. So yes, definitely. And there's also the opportunity for community energy groups to feed in their plans as well. So it's sort of a place where those can actually be recorded where they're not currently.
Thank you. And I think, as you mentioned already, that when these plans are kind of revised or updated every few years, then that, well, those groups' plans might change, then that allows that's a place for it to live when it's updated. Cool. Okay, I can't see any further questions, and in the interest of time, I think I just have one more question and then we can move on to the next agenda item. So it is mentioned in the report about the joint local plan, but what I'm not entirely clear on, and maybe it's because it's an emerging area, maybe it's not so clear, but how exactly it works alongside the joint local plan. So is it a planning consideration, or, you know, exactly how do those two documents come together?
So not formally in our case, because it hasn't been developed as part of the joint local plan evidence base, and this won't be ready until after, hopefully, the joint local plan has gone through examination. But it should be it is something that we are engaging with the planners on. They are involved in the process as well, so they are aware of it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we can move on from that agenda item. Thank you very much, Jessie. And if members have any further questions, I'm sure the officers will have no problem in taking them in a written format via email. So we can move on to the 11th agenda item, which is understanding the net zero challenge for SMEs in Southern Vale. And we have Nick King to introduce this item.
Thanks. I'm just going to share a presentation, so bear with me 2 seconds and do let me know when you see this. It is another for information item as well, so we will try and whip through, conscious of everybody's time.
Appreciate that.
Right. Yeah, all good. Okay, so for everybody that I don't know already, so my name is Nick King. I'm Economic Development Manager here. Just a very quick intro. So through something called the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, which the eagle-eyed among you will know has already bitten the dust under the new government, under the Levelling Up, former Levelling Up department, shall we say. We had an allocation of funding previously that we used to support business decarbonisation, and through part of that funding, we'd commissioned Oxford Brookes Business School to undertake some research into the specific challenges that faced our small and medium enterprises, so we can ensure that we were using the remaining kind of funding that we had through that UK Shared Prosperity Fund to design appropriate solutions to support businesses with decarbonisation. We completed that bit of research a little while ago. We just wanted to talk to members about the research for awareness before we kind of publish it a bit more widely. So I'm just going to invite Dr. Sarah LaRue, who undertook the research for us, to talk very briefly about the findings of the research, and then myself and Karen Tolley from the Economic Development team will talk a little bit about the next steps and what we're going to do as a result of the research. So Sarah, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Okay, so that was joint work with Lauren Tuckerman, who was my colleague at Oxford Brookes. So we undertook the survey to look at SMEs in Oxfordshire. So we opened it out quite widely, but as you can see, we had 52% of respondents from South Oxfordshire, 41% from Vale of Whitehorse. We had 5 people from OCC and 4 from Cherwell, so very, very small amounts of respondents from those 2 councils coming through as well, even though we had thrown it open and everybody was welcome to participate. Our survey took into account quite a wide range of sectors, from community or charity-based organisations, cafes, retail, arts and recreation, professional and scientific organisations, construction organisations, travel and tourism. Most of the firms and organisations that answered our survey had been established for more than 10 years, but they had very, very few staff. So less than 10 staff was what constituted 73% of our survey respondents. We asked them what were the main challenges they were facing at the point that the survey was being rolled out. And 46% said it was access to funding, 37% said they were really struggling to grow their business. Interestingly enough, 28%, and this came as number 3 on their challenge list, said responding to environmental challenges was a main challenge. And so this is something that was quite interesting, because when we conducted a similar survey on a national scale, looking at SMEs from all over the UK, so Wales, Northern Ireland, Scotland and England, responding to challenges some environmental challenges came somewhere around 7th or 8th on the list. So it's really interesting that for Oxfordshire SMEs, it is more front and centre. It is coming in as number 3, as something that they are concerned about and is on their radar. And then obviously 27% were concerned about making a profit. When we looked at how aware SMEs were, 64% said they were aware and they understood the UK government's intentions for net zero. 32% said they were aware, but they didn't completely understand what it meant for them or their organisation, and why they should be interested, why they should be starting to look at their own net zero plans and so on. And 4% were completely unawares about net zero or whether it had anything to do with them, which was interesting. So of the people who started to respond to us, 19% were fully active in lowering emissions. So they were doing everything within their control and were taking active steps towards lowering emissions. 51% said they were engaged, but there was a huge appetite to do more, which was really good to see. 24%, so about a quarter of our respondent base, said they weren't doing anything, but they were keen to start. So there was an appetite to start and to get going towards reducing their carbon emissions. A small minority, 5%, said they were not engaged and they didn't see why they needed to. So they were not intending to get involved either in the next couple of years. When we asked them what were the barriers to action, what was stopping them from doing more towards reducing carbon emissions, 66%, so 2/3 of our survey respondents said it was access to finance. So they were really struggling with the finance aspect towards reducing carbon emissions. 34% said it was a lack of resource internally or there was a lack of time. So because they were such a small entity in terms of the staff available to them, if they were a one-man or two-man band, it was really difficult for them to then also deploy time and effort towards trying to reduce carbon emissions on top of doing everything else that is already on their plates. And then a quarter of our respondents, about 23%, said they couldn't see any return on investment, so it didn't make sense for them to be involved in reducing carbon emissions. So that was an interesting response that we found as well. When asked how likely they are to do more in the next couple of years, 70% said they were either likely or very likely to do more. We have 9% saying they were not likely or very unlikely to do more. And then there is about 20%, and these are the people on the fence. They aren't convinced, but they are happy to be convinced to do more. So if we combine the 21% to the 70% who are already doing something and likely to do more, I think we could mobilize about 91% of organizations within the district councils to be doing more to reduce their carbon emissions. There is that appetite, latent in some cases, but it is there. When asked what sort of support would help them do more towards reducing their carbon emissions, 89% said they would very much welcome a small earmarked grant. So this isn't an open grant for all and sundry for their businesses, but it would be earmarked towards reducing carbon emissions or retrofitting things within their business and so on. So it was those sorts of things. 89% said they would very much welcome a small grant like that. 53% said they would like access to a sustainability platform that would help them to see what actions would be next for their business and what they could do on their carbon emission journey. And then 51% said they would very much appreciate mentoring from a sustainability expert, so one-to-one support to understand what would work for them and their business. So that was sort of the support that they said was very needed at the moment and what they would appreciate. Next slide, please, Nick. So our recommendations based on what we saw and from the comments the textual comments that we received within the survey, so we very much recommend a blended approach to the support. So we suggest that we blend things in terms of looking at how does support work in terms of a grant alongside mentoring or a grant alongside access to a sustainability platform. So if we can see what is the blended effect or efficacy of combining two support mechanisms and seeing whether that causes a boost in carbon emissions being reduced, that is what we are after at the moment. The other thing that we are looking at is trying to evaluate, and I think it's really important for us to be able to evaluate what is the usefulness of the funding that is made in the second stage. So very important to evaluate which support mix is the most effective in achieving maximal reductions. Next slide, please, Nick. Brilliant. Over to you.
Yeah, good stuff. Thanks, Sarah. That's a really useful overview. So what we wanted to talk about, just based on the research, was the components of support that we're looking to offer. And it's worth perhaps keeping in mind that the type of business we're aiming for is that just shy of kind of 75% of respondents who said they were engaged, but could do more or are not doing anything, but would like to start. So there are sort of three components, if you like, to the programme that we're putting together. And we've just closed 2 tender opportunities for programme support elements. The first of those is going to offer kind of free energy audits, and those are businesses that have premises, essentially. And that's a continuation of something that's been going on in Oxfordshire for a little while yet, and we can kind of target to businesses in Vale of Whitehorse. The second part of that is delivering a programme to really kind of engage more businesses and provide that bespoke advice that Sarah's just touched on. So the really difficult bit of this to tackle within our kind of smaller businesses is that resource, and understanding that there are so many different kind of businesses across the district. We have something in the region of about 6,100 SMEs, which is the vast bulk of the business base in the area. And what we found looking at different platforms that may help with decarbonisation, that may help to measure emissions, there are different things that work with different sectors a little better. So we think as part of this programme, what we really need to do is almost put somebody in place that can handhold businesses through that process and allow us to learn a little bit more. As I've kind of touched on, we're drawing funding from this Shared Prosperity Fund at the moment. So it's kind of almost a bit of a one-off. We don't quite know what the future of funding looks like under the new government, but we're allowed using this funding almost to pilot some approaches to build more of an evidence base that we'll be able then to look for further investment, to look for wider programmes that this can really help to inform. Exactly as Sarah's just said, looking at the efficacy of that support and what we can achieve through the different components of it. So I think that part about really kind of offering bespoke support from somebody who can go into businesses, hold their hand through putting a decarbonisation plan together, looking at the whole business model, won't just be applicable for people who have premises, it will be applicable for all types of different businesses. That's going to be really important. The third component is the bit that came through sort of overwhelmingly in the research, which was a lot of people kind of do have a direction, they know what they're doing, they know what they want to do, but access to finance and a perceived kind of long-term return on investment was quite unattractive for most of the respondents. So we're looking at putting in place basically 100% grant of up to £10,000 for small and medium enterprises, and we are really targeting that micro end with that amount of money. You know, we're looking at 1 to 9, 1 to 10 employees that would support capital costs of businesses implementing decarbonisation plans. So that could include things like making adaptations to commercial premises that lower emissions, purchasing technology that helps to lower emissions. That might be smart energy devices, that type of thing. It might be something to enable more public transport to your place of business. It might even be replacing kind of diesel vehicles with electric delivery vehicles, all those types of things. So that will be allowable under that fund. We are very, very close to kind of getting that policy approved and hoping to open that scheme in the next month or two, I think. As ever with SPF, with the programme, we're on a very tight timescale. We have to have project completion by the 31st of March 2025. So it's a real tight timescale to get a grant out there, market it, get people through, assessed, awarded, and actually get some projects finished. But obviously, as I've kind of touched on, what we're really looking to do is build a bigger evidence base and come back with an idea of if we invest this, we're going to get this reduction in emissions through our SME base. So that's, I think, about everything I had to say. Karen, was there anything you wanted to add on the end or anything I've missed?
Yeah, I was just going to add that the first 2 procurements we went out for were just 9,500 for each district, and we procured One Planet Abingdon, and they're going to do a series of workshops and events for businesses, and they're targeting 15 businesses, just to sort of put some context around the numbers of businesses. And then Tame Town Council also were procured for the same amount, and they're going to do similar things like workshops and business breakfast, and again that's another 15 businesses. And then the 2 procurements that we've just literally finished we're in the process of awarding, we're taking up the references at the moment. They're both one of them's looking to do the audits, and that's going to be 22 audits, energy audits and decarbonisation plans, so that'll be 11 per district. And then with the other one-to-one support programme and workshops, online support, that's going to be around 50 businesses. So we're using this as a pilot to sort of see how businesses engage with the process. And then what we're hoping is that some of those businesses, once they've got their plan in place, they'll be able to apply for the grants that, you know, we're going to have opening soon. So that's what we're really sort of working towards, getting them to start thinking about how they can do stuff, but then have some money available. And I think the grants are going to be up to £10,000. So could be enough to sort of do something like solar panels. And then just worth adding that we've just closed the Rural England Prosperity Fund, and quite a few of the people who have applied are applying for decarbonisation type grants, so things like EV chargers and solar panels, etc. So again, that will help to contribute to you know, the overall targets.
Appreciate that's a really quick whistle stop tour through, because I think we're conscious of time, but very happy with any quick questions, and failing that, happy to take them by email. I'll put my email in the chat.
Thank you. Thank you to all those presenters for bringing across the findings from the research. I think in the context of the discussions we were having, I'm not sure if you heard earlier in this meeting about meeting net zero targets and so on, this is one of those examples, I think, of where we help to meet our district-wide, you know, things that we don't have direct control over, but that we're partnership working and working with those, you know, in your example, the small and medium enterprises, to help all of us to meet our net zero targets. So I think that's really that's great to see the kind of work that's going on. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to take any questions. I can't see any, but if people do have questions, I know that as Nick King already mentioned, he's very happy to take those by email. So let's do it that way instead. But thank you so much. I think it's really good work to see, and I'm sure the other members agree. I can see some nodding. So thank you very much. Okay, let's bring it on to the last few agenda items. So let's go to agenda item 12, which is an update from Chloe Bunting on progress on the draft Climate and Nature Action Recovery Plan. Hello.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Apologies.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. So I'm just going to provide a quick verbal update on the progress we've made so far in developing the next iteration of the Climate Action Plan. So we've got a working title for those at the moment of the Nature and Climate Action Plan 24 to 28. So to help emphasise the addition of nature in this plan, and something that we really want to bring out as a progress item from the previous plans. So the new joint plan will be adopted at the end of this year and is being developed alongside the new corporate plans, and you'll notice it will cover the same 4-year period, 24 to 28. So in terms of the journey and input so far, so we began this work last autumn when we started looking at reviewing the current climate action plans, looking at those long-term actions that we wanted to take forward, thinking about the new legislative requirements that have come through, for example, the Environment Act. And officers from our climate and biodiversity team have collated and drafted new ideas and put those forward from research that we've done, our working knowledge, development of specialisms across the last couple of years as our team's grown, and looking at gaps in the current plans that we wanted to take forward. Back in January, some of you might remember, if you're a part of them, that we held a task and finish group jointly with South to capture member ideas across a range of themes, and we took those forward into our long list of developing actions. We also did an internal staff survey to seek some ideas from South and Vale officers and capture their input and make sure we were hearing from those people that have working knowledge kind of daily with projects across all the service areas. We then formulated this into a long list and then made it shorter by analysing, cross-checking the different suggestions from all the streams that we'd had input from. And then we held a team workshop to really refine those draft actions and create some measures to start to think about our monitoring progress of the plan when it's implemented. So currently there's approximately 50 actions. And we've split these into themes of organisational net zero, district net zero, looking at both partnerships, and then communities, engagement and behaviour change. And then we've got nature recovery and adaptation. So in terms of next steps of its development, we're looking to hold a joint task and finish group, CEEAC, to share our draft actions and capture your input and taking those actions to the next step of refinement. So we're just working on a date with Hayley and the chair of the South CEEAC before we can put that forward and send an invite out. So watch this space. We will then take our final list of draft actions to heads of service, brief them on the proposed actions and the journey so far, and these will further refine those actions and finalisation. Many of the actions we have created with the service teams already, so this will have filtered through, but it's kind of that final opportunity to really cement those and get commitment. And then we will be looking to hold a formal CEEAC meeting dedicated to this, dedicated to the plan later in the autumn before it's then taken to Cabinet for approval. And just quickly thinking about the reporting process for the new plan. So this again will be in line with the corporate plan reporting as is current at the moment and kind of key to making sure that those are simultaneous. The current thinking and development on this, that it will be once a year with live data available more frequently. So we'll have an interactive dashboard and there's kind of modelling of this that's been done within the performance team at the moment. And then the idea is for the plan to be reviewed more in depth than the current one is. So each year, so we'll look to add, amend actions to reflect emerging priorities, different strategies and action plans that are coming through, new partnerships, national context, and thinking about those actions that we've completed and then taking those perhaps onto their second stage of development. For example, implementing projects if the action is around developing a business case or looking at various options. We've also got quite a few Oxfordshire-wide strategies and action plans coming through, for example, the local nature recovery strategy and the Oxfordshire adaptation route map and action plan. So we'll, of course, feed those across and reflect those in our internal plan. And also we will be highlighting and progressing, tracking against our targets and removing and marking completed actions just to develop on the current way that the climate action plans are reported. So that concludes my briefing this evening. Happy to take any questions or via email due to time constraints this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Chloe. And on that note, I know we're about to reach our time limit. So Candida, I think it's appropriate that we just vote to extend the meeting, not necessarily intending to use the full time of the extension, but I think we need to do that before past.
Yeah, I think that's right, Chair. So if you could just suggest that and then have somebody to second and get everyone to vote on that one.
Yeah, okay. So I'm going to propose that we, yes, thank you. I'm going to propose we, for the extension, I can see Councillor Bentley seconds. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, okay. Do we need to have a vote as well, Candida?
Well, I saw a load of nodding heads, so unless anyone...
Okay, that's the vote.
I think that's, yeah.
Okay, yes. My intention is not for us to use the full half hour, but since we're about to reach 8:30, let's do that. Great, okay. Thank you for that update, Chloe. Any questions? We can take one question. Okay, Councillor James.
Oh yeah, thank you very much for that update. Do you think it's likely, we're thinking about having somewhat more quantitative sort of targets that we can in the next plan? Because I know looking at the sort of reporting for the corporate plan and the climate action plan at the moment, sometimes it is a bit hard to see how, you know, they're just kind of like, green, amber, red. It helps you pick things out quickly, but sometimes it's actually hard to see what has been done or not, or whether something's just been looked at.
Yes, so we've got a lot more of that in the draft measures that we've formulated, agreed that we kind of need to increase that data capture. So yeah, hopefully that will also be reflected in the task and finish group, because we'll be able to look at those in comparison to the actions that we've got.
Thank you. Yes, and from what you've just said, it sounds like, with the answer to Councillor James' question as well, sounds like we're really taking forward learnings from how we've looked at reporting against our action plan before and how better to do that in the future. So that's really great to see. Thank you, Chloe. Okay, I'll move us on to the next agenda item. So agenda item 13 is progress on the Oxfordshire Local Nature Recovery Action Plan, and that is from Dominic.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the Oxfordshire Local Nature Recovery Strategy. It was an error in the agenda. So anyway, I'm sure you all knew that. Yeah.
Good point.
So I did prepare a brief presentation, but I'm not going to bore you all to death with yet another PowerPoint. So I'll just crack on through it. In essence, so you're all aware that the Local Nature Recovery Strategy, which is it's effectively a national project. So Local Nature Recovery Strategy are currently being developed across the country, and they should all tie together. Now, DEFRA have set out quite a defined way which we have to produce the strategies, so they should all be relatively consistent across the country. So this will be, in the bigger picture, that the first time we've got essentially a national plan for nature, which actually, if you look at it, you'd be able to zoom down almost to field level to see what the aspirations are and what the plans are for nature. So it's absolutely one of the best things that's happened in terms of nature in my lifetime, I suspect. Anyway, so the County Council are the responsible authority for producing the strategy, and the District Council, South and Vale, are both what's called supporting authorities. So we have a statutory duty to work with the county on that. And in practice, myself and increasingly Roselle have been spending an awful lot of time working with the steering group that's producing this strategy. There's a prioritisation working group, and there are numerous other working groups to help pull this thing together. It's very much a team effort, and it's very much not an OCC document. It's very collaborative. I think that's fair to say. So just in case anybody's wondering about OCC telling us what to do, that's not the case. So, as I said, it's quite a prescribed process, and essentially there are 5 steps we have to go through. I think we are about 3/4 of the way through those 5 steps, and that involved. So, since CEEAC last met, you'll be aware that there've been a whole series of public engagement events and so on which have happened. So, over the course of February, March, up until May, there were, I think, over 1,000 people been involved in responding to either the online consultation or been to one of the 14 in-person events that happened across the county. There are 12 separate workshops. So we've sought to get input from, and particularly from, key groups like landowners, farmers, because they are absolutely key to the success or otherwise of a local nature recovery strategy. If their views aren't sought, then bearing in mind that 95% of the land in Oxfordshire is privately owned, we're not going to get very far. So there's been a lot of effort to try and engage with different sectors, and obviously including members. Now, I think it's fair to say that farmers still remain the most difficult group to speak to. They're reluctant to get involved in some of these things, but we have been able to do it through a number of different farmer clusters and presenting in different ways through meetings that they're already going to, rather than trying to get them to come to us, we go to them. So there's been quite a lot of activity in that way. So the timeline as we speak is that the draft strategy will be out to consultation between October and November this year. So what we're proposing is, once the draft strategy is published, we will set up a specific CEEAC task and finish group to have a look at the draft strategies and to seek collectively your thoughts on what's in it. and that will help us to inform our corporate responses to the LNRS. So as a local authority, as a supporting authority rather, we have there are a number of key points we have to agree to the strategy progressing. So one of those is that we have to agree that the strategy goes to public consultation. So that will be done through an individual cabinet member decision. So our cabinet member, Bethia, will be asked to make a decision as to whether she's happy for it to proceed. Our opportunity then to comment on that strategy follows that. So we won't be commenting on the strategy at that point. We're just saying, yeah, it's in a good enough, hopefully it will be in a good enough position to go to consultation. We will then have the opportunity to comment. Now, the second point is before it's published, we have to give an affirmative view as to whether we're happy for it to be published. And at that point, we will take the strategy through the cabinet system. So it will go for adoption by the Vale. I think, so the actual consultation will consist of 4 key parts. So firstly, there will be a description of the strategy area. So that's basically describing what wildlife, what nature we have across Oxfordshire and what are the key issues facing that. So we all know what most of those are, but if that's a key point to sort of key part of setting the scene. We'll then have 2 statements of biodiversity priorities. So there'll be one for habitat. So the biodiversity priorities will be, okay, this is the position. We've described the county. This is the position, everything's in. What are we going to do about it? So what are our priorities? What are the things we really think we need to tackle? So which habitats do we need to increase the number of? There will also be a set of species priorities as well, because not all, so most species are associated with certain habitats, but there are some species which fall outside of that. And there may be species, for example, we're looking to introduce to the county which fall outside of that. So there'll be a species priorities list as well, and a set of priorities for those. And then all of that will be brought together onto a map, so a priorities map. So there will be a physical map which shows the ecological network we're looking to achieve in Oxfordshire. So that's it rattled through in a nutshell. And obviously we'll be looking to, as soon as we've got confirmation of the dates of the consultation, I will try and get a task and finish group set up so that we can all have a good discussion about it, and we can record your views and work out where we want to go with it. So that's all from me, and I'll take any brief questions you might have.
Thank you, Dominic. Thank you for taking us through all of that. And I know that lots of the members here feel strongly that as part of the climate emergency, ecology and biodiversity and all the things that you were just talking about, nature recovery, are really important. So it's great to see the focus in this area and really the detail that this is going into. So I'm really glad to see that. Any questions from members? Not seeing any questions. Okay, in that case, then if you think of anything in the meantime, I'm sure that Dominic is happy to take those via email. But yes, thank you for that comprehensive update. That brings us to the final agenda item, which is update from task and finish groups and future items. And so I only wanted briefly to talk about or to mention the future items, which have already been mentioned. So it is simply that later in the summer, we will have task and finish groups. That will be members from here, and I believe it will be joint with South as well, on our nature and climate action plan, which Chloe already mentioned, so our NCAP. That'll be later in the summer. And then, as Dominic just mentioned, we will also have one on our response to the consultation for the local nature recovery strategy, which we expect to be in the late autumn when that comes out. So we'll obviously arrange that in due course. And that is the end of our agenda. Thank you, everybody, for your patience and your time this evening. I think it was really worthwhile. I think we had some great discussion and also some really good updates from our officers and also some external people as well. Thank you so much. And can we close the meeting there, please? Let me know when the stream has ended.